So the format of this evening is we have a series of presentations from our guest speakers, and during those presentations, there may be opportunities for asking questions, specific questions relevant to the presentations, and then after we've had our presentations, we're going to move to a panel discussion with all our presenters. And we have some pre-submitted questions, and will also be an opportunity to take questions from the room as well.
Thank you for having us. It's good to be invited to this meeting. I'll be excited to hear from Willie as well afterwards when we get round to the AgriCap. But no, I'm James Pittman. I'm from the Farm Carbon Toolkit. I'm here with Michael Brown, who will pop up at some point. Maybe say hello.
Hi, James. Yeah, nice to meet everyone here. Thank you.
Yeah, so we work for the Farm Carbon Toolkit. We're a not-for-profit carbon community interest company based across the UK. We have Michael up in Scotland and a few other up in Scotland, and then we're split across England and a bit of Wales as well. So we're just going to run through how you can do a carbon audit using our tool, and how you can sort of footprint your croft. We have tried to tailor this to your croft. Can you see my screen all right? I'll just make sure I haven't used
Yeah, can do. Thanks, James.
Yeah.
Cool. I've already just sort of run through this, but yeah, we've got advisors that are up and down the country that can help you run through carbon footprinting. But what I'm going to show you today is our always free to farmer tool, which you can get on at any point and go and do a carbon footprint with. It's been independently reviewed and verified, which allows us to work with you guys and the Scottish Government in this rural payment scheme system. And yeah, we're funded by the likes of UKRI, the National Lottery, and various other grant bodies. We have a completely public methodology, so if you ever want to go in there and delve into the maths behind it all, it is all there. We also have a team, Michael, myself, and a few others that will answer any emails and queries that you have, or pick up the phone to you if you ever want to discuss anything with us. So yeah, if you're at all intrigued and you just want to be nosy about it all, please get in contact and we'll run it through. Why would you do a carbon footprint? Now, I mean, a lot of you would have just been thinking about carbon footprint in terms of this rural payment scheme, but you might have your own interest in it. And so what I was hoping to do today would just be run through of what you should be thinking about when you come to your footprint, and what you might get out of it. One of the things we see from the Farm Carbon Toolkit side of things is it's a really unique way of looking at your farm. It gives you a different perspective on what you're doing, where your inefficiencies may lie, or where you may have areas of excess, or maybe areas of growth that you didn't quite realize. The other benefit of it is you're part of this really positive narrative that's going on in terms of making farming a more sustainable and more environmentally friendly system. And we really think that helps build your business resilience, not only in terms of your environmental impact, but in terms of the sort of monetary value of taking this seriously in terms of your carbon system, and also making you think more clearly about sort of soil health and other aspects of your farm in detail. So yeah, how to make a carbon footprint. What you really need to do is think about your croft in terms of a year. What I'm going to run through is a few of the items that you'll need to think about, and in terms of crofting, when putting your croft into a carbon footprint. I don't want to tell you how to do your croft. That's all your guys' knowledge, not mine. But we have various guides and things to tell you what to be thinking about. We have these in PDF versions if you wanted to print them off and take them home, or they're all on our site if you want to go and have a look over. And we have various data collection sheets if you want to use them. But what we'd really encourage is just getting on the site and having a go and starting adding things in. It's like making a Tesco's shopping list, where you just add the items of things that you have on farm and start building up an emissions footprint. But so if we're thinking about a croft and we're thinking about what's happened on it on the year, you might want to start with what's most tangible in terms of carbon footprinting, which would be your fuel usage. So if you're using a lot of red diesel, if you've got machinery on farm and you've got lubricant oils and things you're bringing in, these will all have emissions associated with the burning of them. So when you burn the red diesel, and also emissions associated with the manufacture of them, so they're making the diesel in the first place. So have a think about sort of some of the items you might have. And within that sort of section, we also have things like contracted emissions for when you've got a bloke coming in and doing the ploughing for you. So that's sort of contractor operations in the field, and other things like that. We also then can start looking at the crops you might be growing on your croft. So whether you're growing wheat, barley, oilseed rape, whatever it is, how you manage them, because whether you leave the straw in the ground and reincorporate it might have slightly higher emissions associated with it, but it might also have better soil health benefits. So it gives you a sort of a think on how those sort of interactions might be playing out. You can also then enter any inputs that you're buying in onto farm. So if you're buying in fertilizers like nitrogen, or if you're bringing in herbicides or pesticides or anything like that, they'll have a carbon footprint associated with their manufacture, like I said before, but also some of them with their applications. So a nitrogen fertilizer, there'll be leaching of that nitrogen, and it will turn into, well, some of it will be converted into nitrous oxides, which are greenhouse gases, obviously not great for the environment. So again, this is getting you to have a real full think about what you're putting into your farm and what you're bringing onto farm, and how that might be impacting the environment. I'll run through that in a second, Sarah. It is all private to yourself, but I'll get to that in a second. The other aspect aside from crops will be your livestock. So we group our livestock by the animal type. So you've got your cattle, your dairy cattle, your sheep, your goats, your horses, whatever else it wants to be. Whatever you have on the croft, we cover most of the animal varieties. And what would be important here to think about is that your emissions associated over the course of the year with the average of the animals over the year. So if I had 30 sheep on my farm from another farmer for 6 months, I'd enter that as 15 sheep over the year, because the average for that sheep herd was 15 over the course of that year. It's not the 30 over 6 months. So that goes into seasonal land, and I believe we had a question about commons, which may be common land and shared land and seasonal land that we will get onto later in the Q&A session. But yeah, that's how we approach it in our system. And then also alongside the livestock, there's the actual bedding and feed that you bring on farm as well. And then finally, we've got things like your capital items, the materials you're buying on. So any fencing, so stones if you're rebuilding stone walls, or if you're building stock fence and all the rest. But then there's also things like pipes and stuff if you're putting them in the ground to improve drainage or whatever else. Oh yeah, and then finally, sorry, there's the smaller part of the footprint, but you might have an on-croft office, and you might have things like paper and waste associated with that that you can be thinking about. All of this gets captured in it, and like I say, it's like making a Tesco shopping list. All of the items are there. You can search them up. They're relatively easily categorized. I think it's pretty simple, but I know that me and Michael differ in some things. So if you're ever lost on something, we can help you find it. And if it's something we don't have, we'll see if we can add it. Yeah, so I've spoken there about the sources of emissions, but in the carbon calculator, we also do carbon sequestration. So this can be measured sequestration, so or things that are we have really good data on the prediction of the amount of sequestration. So things like woodlands and hedges, we can roughly, well, quite well estimate how much carbon biomass is being made up into the tree over the course of a year period. And we can do that to different species and different age of trees. So it means that we can get a really good idea of what the sort of carbon sequestration of any woodland on farm or any infield trees could be doing on your farm. There's also soil organic matter, which is really important. And we'd really encourage you to go out there and get soil sample testing done. It's great to have, and realistically, if you're going to measure the change in your carbon stocks, you need to know what's happening over time. So it means having a soil sample at 2 time points, not just having one soil sample, because then you can see whether your carbon stock is improving over a period or whether it's not. Again, we've got a team of advisors that can help you with finding soil samplers near you, or we've got soil samplers ourselves that can come up and help. And run you through the results as well, because they can be unintelligible sometimes. So hopefully there's some advice there that we can provide. Alongside those measured sequestration, so that measured carbon intake, we can also model sequestration. So now this doesn't quite meet the same standards of verification as the measured woodland and soil samples, but this can give you an idea of what the potential carbon sequestration is happening on your farm. So if you're planting skylark lays or wildflower meadows and things like this to increase your biodiversity, they'll likely be having a really good impact on your soil health. Good soil health normally locking up more carbon. And so based on various studies on different countryside stewardship schemes in the UK, in England, there has been some good data, model data on what the carbon sequestration is happening on farm. And so we have now mapped those countryside stewardship schemes to the agroecology schemes in the Isle of Man and the agroecology countrysides are the AECSs. I can't remember what the exact terminology is in Scotland, but we've mapped them to those schemes as well, so that hopefully you'll be able to input the data according to those and sort of get an idea how those actions might be affecting your farm. That model data also goes through various other systems as well, such as peatlands and pastures and forages and all the rest. So yeah, that's sort of the areas of sequestration. So you've got your emissions and your sequestration, and what you get once you've entered all of that is a final report of your carbon balance. I'll run through this in a second. I'm going to jump off the slides and go to an actual footprint just to sort of give you a demonstration of how this would look. So this is our carbon calculator. It's all you have to do is just Google farm carbon calculator and you'll come up with us. It's free to sign up. Like we say, all of our reporting is free for farmers. Logging in only requires an email address so that you can come back to it at another date. It's not just left there on the one occasion. And then you'll build your own report. So it's as easy as clicking start the calculator. There's resources and quick starts if you need them. Michael is working hard on a croft specific user guide. So it'll be a bit more to your scale rather than a dairy size scale or a vegetable farm scale. It'd be more of your to a croft standard. But you'll have a dashboard to which you can add reports. Adding reports, again, just as simple as clicking this button here and you start a new report. I'm going to jump to one that we've prepared earlier. I say we, Michael's prepared earlier. And this is an example croft based on real data from a farm one of our advisors visited. It's anonymized. It is been adjusted just so that it's not clearly apparent what it is. But yeah, this is an example of a croft farm. It's a beef farm up in Scotland, and it is over a relatively small area of 43 hectares. Well, actually, it's quite a big area, but yeah, you can put all of this data in here. I won't run through this now. We can do a more in-depth demo session if you guys want it at another date. And we do have like the guides online, and we have regular drop-in sessions as well if you ever need to come to it. But when you start building a report, you'll come to one of our 10 tabs. So we've got these tabs across the top, which are different sections of your farm that you should be thinking about. Fuels is the first, and like I said, the easiest one to get your head around because it's things like your red diesels and whatever. And all you do is come along and say, I'm going to add red diesel onto my emissions footprint. Maybe I used, I don't know, 1,000 litres of it this year. I know that because I've got the receipts here that I paid for the VAT receipts and all the rest. So maybe tailoring when you do your footprint to when you've got your data all in front of you can be useful. We do have data collection sheets if you want to do it over time, which can also help. And you'll see there that 1,000 litres of diesel has been added to my carbon footprint, and it's gone into this big black bar here, and you can see what proportion of your footprint is made up of that red diesel. I can see here Michael's already added red diesel, so that was a bit of an error on mine. So I'm going to delete that one, and it is as simple as clicking delete, and it's gone from your carbon footprint. You don't have to worry about it. You'll have noticed as well when we came in, say I wanted to change this footprint and say, oh, it wasn't 857, it was actually 957. every time you click on something, it's clicking save, because as soon as you enter an item onto the report, it is saved saved there, so that you can come back to it on a completely different day and come and edit it, and it'll be as you left it. Everything is saved instantly, so you don't have to deal with that. So that might be my fuel section complete. So I'll mark it as complete, and you'll see it will come up with a nice tick across the top like these others. What we've done here, and Michael's been clever, he's left off the beef cattle in here. So I thought animals is obviously, and livestock is obviously a tricky one to think about on a yearly term, because you're sort of normally thinking about one cow, not thinking about the fact that I need to think about that as a group of cows on an average over a year. So say I've got some beef cattle on farm, maybe some beef finishing steers, and that might be my herd B or whatever. These are the Croft herd. I can just give them a name, and then I can say how much was in that herd. Were they on farm for the full year? So say there was 10 cows on that farm or in that herd. They were there for the year. Just put that data in there. The mandatory items are always given a star, so that you know which ones are mandatory to enter. And you can put in information here if you lost some cattle because maybe they died, or you sold them off, or whatever like that. You can enter that into here to get that sort of level. We also have a livestock wizard which can run you through in even more detail if you want to go through month by month data. It's going to take a second to load because I've got too many tabs open. But you can enter here if you had how many cattle you had on farm at different points in the year, just to make sure that you're keeping track of what's going on. So then you can enter your average live weight. We have defaults assumed for something like a calf, for a steer, or for a dairy heifer, or whatever else. But if you know off the top of your head, you can enter that in. So this would be something around 600 for a steer. And then you want to think about where its manure is going, because the emissions from livestock are mostly based on their enteric emissions, so what they're burping and farting out, but then also their manure emissions. So manure is a big part of this. And so if I'm thinking these dairy cows are in for 3 months of the year, so that's 25% of the year it's farmyard manure, but the rest of the time they're out in the fields, so that's 75% of the time out in the fields, manure is just falling straight onto the land. And it was all grassland, like we mentioned before, so all of that manure is being spread on grasslands. And we do that, and we enter, and we get our cows added to our report. I think I've opened too many tabs, so it's stressing out about my caches. But we've got the beef cattle here for those finishing steers, and you can see what the footprint is associated with them down here. Again, I can tick that off and say that section is done, and I can see where that falls in my full footprint. So you can see down here that my livestock produces about 30 tons of CO2e per year. And you can see that in comparison to your emissions compared to your removals, and you can also see where you fall on your balance. So you can see here at the moment, I'm quite far off of net zero, or quite far off of net negative. I have more emissions than I have sequestration, and I might think, oh, I haven't entered my soil organic matter data. So I can jump back onto the sequestration tab, come in here and add some soil organic matter data. So say I've got a crop field. Oh, misspelt, but we'll go with it for a second. And someone's come along, taken soil samples of this 4-hectare field at a 30 centimeter depth. They've told me that my average default soil bulk density is 2. And then in 2024, so in 2024, maybe my soil organic matter percentage was 2% and my soil bulk density was only 2%. But in 2025, that actually increased because I was doing good soil management. And so maybe I'm up to 2.1, and my soil bulk density has also jumped up to 2.1. What you'll see then is the amount of carbon sequestration associated with that. I may have made some fairly big changes in my soil because that looks like a lot of carbon I've sequestered. But you can see there that the soil organic matter has jumped up, and my sequestration associated with soil organic matter is pretty huge. If I jump again to the view results now, you'll see that my carbon removals has massively jumped up to that 118 because of that soil organic matter data. and my carbon balance is now in the net negative. So it's really good to make sure that you're sort of capturing everything you do on farm to make sure that your footprint is tracking what you're actually doing. As we showed before, you've got this easy to view system here with different KPIs as you want them, and with a different breakdown of where your emissions are coming from, even down to which scopes they're associated with. So if they're on farm scopes, your scope 1s, or they're indirect ones like your scope 3s, and whether they're coming out as carbon dioxide or methane or N2O. You get a further breakdown of this in the full results section and the benchmarking that I showed before. The other option you have is to download this as a PDF that you can take to an agronomist or anyone you're working with. Much easier for them to take on and get the sort of highlights of what's going on farm. Or we have a CSV, which is essentially an Excel sheet that you can use to investigate your data. There's also a JSON there if you're more tech savvy, but that is getting into the weeds of coding. So yeah, that's how to do a footprint. It is that easy to make them. Like I say, it's a Tesco shopping list. We're still developing the calculator. We're adding more to it. It is in a good state now for you to go and make a carbon footprint and really get a full picture of what's happening on your farm. But we are open to your queries. We're open to, if you want things added, if you think things maybe need explaining more, we can go through and add these. Like I say, Michael's working on this Crofter's guidance for you. So hopefully that'll be something that we can share with you relatively soon, so that it's a bit more appropriate to your scale of work. And we add to our benchmarking data set. So we've got that benchmarking data set where you can compare to farms your size. That's only going to improve as more farm data comes in. Now, all data is your own. We don't have direct access unless you allow us to. And when it comes to benchmarking, we do aggregated and completely anonymous data. So none of your data is being like pinpointed or shown off or anything like that. The data I showed in that example crop, like I say, is tweaked and given permission from the farmer that the advisor worked with. We, at the moment, work in hectares. For the Isle of Man, which we work with the Isle of Man government, they have asked for us to work in acres, so we've transferred to that system. We're going to try and make it a toggleable switch so you can work between hectares, acres, and meters squared. At the moment, it's hectares, but keep your ear out. It might be changing to a different scale in the future. And I'm sure it'll be touched on later on, but we're also working on harmonization across calculators. So we are working directly with AgriCalc and with Cool Farm Alliance to make sure that the methodologies that we use are all aligned, and that we're working from the same. We're working with the same assumptions and understanding, and that any products or any data coming onto these calculators has to meet a certain standard of certification to have its carbon footprint included on our data. So, for example, fertilizers, making sure that the emissions associated with their production is a proper LCA and the due diligence is done behind the data. So, yeah. I've probably run over a little bit there. It was a bit of a whistle stop tour to the calculator. We would honestly say, and Michael's a huge advocate for this as well, that get on there and have a go. It's free to use. There's no harm in it. We don't spam you with emails either. You can sign up to our newsletter or never hear from us ever again if you want. Just get on there and have a go at using the calculator. It's pretty simple to use, and the data you'll get out of it will really give you an insight onto your farm. If you have any information, any questions or any queries and things, you can call us, you can email us, and we have lots of resources and things on the site that we can go through.
Okay, thank you for that, James and Michael.
Cheers.
I'm seeing that Willie has joined us now. Your technical issues have been resolved, I hope. So I'll hand over to Willie, who's going to take us through AgriCalc.
I'm not from AgriCalc. I'm just ACC, and I do carbon audits on AgriCalc. I'm not an expert, but I'm just going to run through maybe a typical croft or not, as the case may be. I've just gone, I think maybe Celia maybe sent you the sheet that I'm working from, which I was just making up that somebody has given me us details to put on to AgriCalc. In fact, hopefully I'll wait on that. So this is not my work login. This is my own login, and this is me basically starting a new report. So this would be basically what you'd fill in once you've got your login for AgriCalc, and then you just create a new report. So we'll call it Crofting Fed 2025, and the Acrofter has gone for December 2024. So because you're doing it yourself in your own croft, it's not under Farm Advisory Service or Preparing for Sustainable Farming. The enterprise sectors for this croft, there is a grazing and forage, and we add the type. They've got some rough grazing, and they've also got some pasture grazing. There's no hay or silage made in this croft, and they also have sheep. So we add a group, and we'll call it use, and it's a crossbred flock. There's also obviously all the different options of if it's a hill flock, if it's an extensive hill flock, early lambing flock, maybe you just have store lambs. For purposes of this, I've just picked a crossbred ewe flock and a store finisher, and we just add on the types of sheep. So Acrofter has ewes, tups, ewe hogs, gimmers, and lambs. And we can just go forward then. And then we're looking for the area of ground on your croft. So this croft, this croft has only got rough grazing and pasture grazing. There's no woodland on it. There's no any meters of hedges. There's no roads, yards and buildings. It's just rough grazing and pasture grazing. And we'd also look at the average age of the grassland and the percentage of clover in the grass sward as well. And we'll go back and see if this might work now. Right, it's not going to let me put anything in for some reason. So I'll just go through screens and talk about what I would put in based on what the sheet is. So for the rough grazing, there is 30 hectares of common grazing, and which is rough grazing, all rough grazing, and they have 10 hectares of grassland, which is an average of 9 years old, and there's around about 5% clover grass sward. So some things are going to be exact. You would get obviously your land figures exactly off your IACS probably. The average age might be a best estimate, and your clover and grass sward might be a best estimate of percentage. You would then add in your fertilizer. So in this case, it's half a ton of 2010-10 that he puts across his grassland, and that's all we need in the fertilizer and lime. There's no imported organic materials and manures. There's no transferred manure because he actually lambs outside, so he's got no sheep inside. There's no spraying done, so nothing goes in the pesticides. And the grazing regime is probably quite light on the common grazing, on the rough grazing his part, so probably 40% in here, and his pasture grazing is probably around about 50% because he grazes it fairly well. Again, that would be a best estimate that you would just have to to use your best idea for that. The allocation, crop use allocated to livestock, he's only got sheep, so it would be 100% for rough grazing and 100% for pasture grazing. If you had beef or dairy or pigs or poultry that were on this on the grazing land, then you'd be putting a percentage based on probably livestock units I would normally use. The average numbers, you can open the livestock monthly stock totals and put your numbers for each month. I've said that he's got 30 ewes on average over the year. He's 2 tups, 5 ewe hogs are kept, 5 dimmers are coming into flock, and the average number of lambs would be, there were 60 born in April, and they were either sold or retained in August, so it'd be 60 divided by 12 months times by 5. For the 5 months they were lambs on the place, and that would give you your average number of lambs, and you would just do that depending on how long you kept the lambs. Ewes, normally we would go for an opening weight and closing weight of ewes would be the same, and tups would be the same. We'd normally start with lambs at probably 3 kilos, maybe 4 kilos. Again, your closing weight might just depend on whether you actually have a weigh scales, or you might be estimating what weight they are, and we would normally follow that up from, if they're 35 kilos at weaning, then hogs would start off at 35 and jump to maybe 50 kilos at closing weight. The gummers would start at 50 kilos and then finish at maybe 70 kilos, and your ewes might be 70 kilos, tups 80, 85, just depend on breed, obviously very variable as well. Then we come to sales and purchases. So in this case, he had sold 4 cull ewes, so we would just put in the number of sales for cull ewes and the average weight, any deaths, and the same would go for tups, hogs, dimmers. Lambs, he had sold 55 lambs at the average weight of 35 kilos, and wool would be either your slip from whoever you sell your wool to, or if you use it on croft for some reason for any purpose, then you would maybe just have to go for a best estimate of a weight for the wool. Lambing percentage, you would just have your lambing percentage, and the percentage of singles, twins, and triplets would go in here. For manure management, it would be a split between, in this case, he only has them on the pasture ground and the hill ground, so it was like a 50-50 split for everything bar the tups, which were 100% on the grassland. Obviously, if you were lambing inside, you'd be putting some in for solid storage, a percentage, maybe a 10% or whatever, if they were kept in for a wee while before lambing time. Purchased feeds, which again is not going to let me show the drop down, but there's all the different feeds, whether that's silage, hay, into compound feeds, into minerals, and a tonnage for each one. Bedding in this case doesn't apply because he is lambing outside and he has no purchased bedding. The feed ration is there for you, and then it would be a case of the use of the electricity, your red tractor diesel, which would include, so if you were maybe making silage bales and a contractor was coming in, you would need an estimate of what diesel usage they had made. If you're struggling for estimate or amounts of litres of diesel, you can always use maybe Farm Management Handbook, which would give you litres per hectare that would be used on a tractor or baler or whatever. In this case, I think I'd said that he had petrol, which you would use in a quad bike, and then we would allocate the fuel use. There was nothing for kerosene, LPG, mains gas, or coal. There's no renewables, and he had 10 kilograms of waste plastic on the farm, which you would just need to allocate to probably the sheep enterprise in this case. And if it had worked properly, we would have had a report to look at now, but unfortunately we don't. But that's basically, that would be your run through of your Croft, which is very quick to do, but the time is spent getting all the figures together. So you would spend far more time getting your figures together than you would actually putting it onto AgriCalc. That's always the important bit, is trying to get as much good information as you possibly can. As you'll see here, there's things that you would have exactly. You would maybe know exactly how much fertilizer had been bought. Other things where you're guesstimating, estimating maybe red diesel use or things like that, or weights of lambs if you're selling store lambs. So it's always just, I think, if you can make it as accurate as possible. And that is it.
No, thanks very much for that, Willie. There is a specific question in the chat there. Does AgriCalc account for sequestration too?
Yeah, you can have soil carbon in as well, if you want. But I think for someone that's doing it themselves, if they want to, I would be inclined to go for the simplest option as you can. To, if it's just for whole farm plan, you're wanting to do it, you're just wanting to get a carbon audit done with a report at the end. But you can do sequestration, yeah.
Great. So I'm now going to hand over to Ian Carmichael from the Scottish Government, who's going to give us a presentation on the government's position on the whole farm plan and give us some more detail on what their expectations are and where these tools fit in. Over to you, Ian.
Thanks, Donald. And you'll be glad to know there is no presentation. So it was just to give you what basically the background to why carbon audits, I suppose, have been included in the requirement for the whole farm plan. So basically, carbon audit, as both tools have shown, it's basically an efficiency calculator. So what the purpose of the whole farm plan carbon audit is to get every farmer and crofter to understand what their carbon footprint is, and see the areas where the greatest emissions are happening, and to then look at ways to start to reduce these and start to reduce their overall carbon footprint. So out the back of the two tools that you do yourself, you will get very generic recommendations, but what you also get is, or what we've seen in the demonstrations, would have been that there's clear diagrams that show you where the biggest emissions are coming from, which part of your croft business the emissions are. And I would say that's where you start to focus on, is there efficiency you can make? So basically, becoming a more efficient saves you money and makes you more money. I think at the end of the day, that's the key, as well as driving down your emissions. So there's a lot of wins there. So it might be mortality rates, reducing mortality rates might be a problem, and that's so you can tie in with your animal health and welfare plan when you're speaking to your vet about, is there issues within your sheep or cattle herd that you could look at, is your calving percentage not great, or, something like that just helps you to just improve your business. So what we're suggesting is, you can do, you've seen tonight that you can do them yourself. So yes, it takes a bit of time, a bit of prep, just maybe to gather the information, but it can be done. You get the output from it. You'll see where your efficiencies are, where your greatest emissions are, and it's then to do that just bit of research to either find what's key for your business that you want to improve on, to drive on your efficiencies, and hopefully lead to reductions in emissions.
Thanks for that, Ian. I'm sure we'll have plenty questions for you in the next session. So we've got all our speakers are joining us on the panel. So we've got James and Michael, and we've got Willie Budge, and we've got Ian Carmichael, and we're also joined by Cheryl McIntyre, a crofter from Skye, and Cheryl's got experience of doing a carbon audit for North Talisker Sheep Stock Club a few years ago, and is going to share some of her experiences with that, and happy to answer your questions about that too. I'm going to come straight back to Ian and ask about funding available for carbon audits and what support is available to crofters looking to carry out a carbon audit at the moment. Or what was available.
Yeah. So currently, I don't think unfortunately, there's no funding available. Although we are heading for a new financial year, and there's hope that there may be announcement of future funding or continued funding through the Preparing for Sustainable Farming for carbon audits and soil analysis. But I'm not sure. I'm hoping that's the case, but I've not heard that confirmed. So I hope, that's all I can say at the moment. Is I hope there will be continued funding through Preparing Sustainable Farming.
What sort of time period would you expect us to hear more on that, Ian?
You put me in the spot. I'm not sure. I don't know what they are, to be honest with you, Don. I'm afraid. Sorry. Hopefully, I hope it would be soon. We're going to be in February. End of March is our new financial year, so I hope a decision will be made soon.
And just on that point around support there, maybe if I could come to Willie and anything that the Farm Advisory Service can offer at the moment around this.
Yeah, so the Farm Advisory Service put a pause on carbon audit funding in September time because I think there was just such an influx, people applying for funding under. So there was two streams in 2024. There was the PSF where you could do your carbon audit and get funding, and there was also the Farm Advisory Specialist Plan carbon audit. So a bit like what Ian said, we don't, he'll know more than I do. He's maybe just not letting on. I would have thought that into a new financial year, the specialist plans under Farm Advisory Service, the carbon audits may have opened up again as well. But and I know it was a really poor presentation, but I would hope that people could have a shot at doing the carbon audit themselves on AgriCalc or James and Michael's one. Because at the end of the day, you just need to have a carbon audit in place, and that's you for 5 years then. So AgriCalc is a moment, I don't know ins and outs. As far as I know, it's a 3-month trial period you get free, but go on, do your carbon audit, and that's you covered for 5 years. So people that maybe if I know that some people are not really computer literate, but potentially maybe your neighbour is, and maybe your neighbour could help you do it under a free one as well. So I think there's plenty, there's options, I think, for you, even if your funding doesn't come, to maybe do it yourself, or as I say, get maybe someone to help you. And as a last resort, hopefully funding comes back, and maybe you do have to get an agent then,
Thanks for that, Willie. Got a question that appeared in the chat earlier on about the sort of parameters of the carbon audit, and where do you stop, particularly thinking about around the garden and the house, which for some crofts could be extensive. So maybe I'll come to James first on that, and then maybe I'll come to Ian to see what the government view is on that.
So I saw the term in the question format as I've had to decroft my house, I think was the phrase was. And if that's the case of you're separating your home emissions from the rest of the farm emissions, you can treat them almost as two separate entities. So the stuff that's on the croft and you'd class in your croft system would be what you'd be doing the carbon footprint for. And that's, I assume, what Ian will say is what's needed for the rural payment scheme system. I also saw a good question earlier about the fact that if I'm driving past the feed store and I pick up feed on the way home, how do I put that into my footprint? In terms of, we would consider that journey back from the feed store as part of that croft emissions, because you're burning the fuel and delivering that fuel home. And in our tabs on that I showed, one of the tabs was distribution, and on there you can input any miles you've done of delivery of driving, and so you can, instead of putting it in as litres of diesel burnt, because you won't know that for your 10-minute drive down the road from the feed store home, you can put in, I drive a van 10 miles, and anyway, it was one load of this weight, and you can then input that onto your footprint in that way. Obviously, that can become a bit tedious doing it every time you go to the feed store, if you're just picking up a bag of grain every time you go and pick up the kids or whatever it is. But realistically, you can think about how many times you do that over the year. You're always going probably to the same feed stores, aren't you? So you can start amalgamating that into one larger number rather than having to do every single trip in one go. Yeah, anything to add on that, Michael?
Yeah, just on that, James. No, I do. This is the kind of question that we're really kind of happy that you're asking, because it's what we hear day in, day out when it's the evening now, but all day I've been answering these kinds of questions from people trying to create footprints on our system. And they're good questions, but actually I would say that is about as hard as it gets. Trying to distinguish between, do I include those mileage or not that mileage? When our advisors go out and deliver these reports, and perhaps Willie will have this experience too, that level of detail often actually isn't in these carbon footprints, because it will be a very minor part of what essentially is the whole year and everything that happened throughout the year. So if you're going every day to the feed store, it's probably worth putting that in there. But if it's 1 or 2 trips, we would love you to try and solve that and add it in. But also, it's perfectly reasonable, I think, to think, I don't quite know how that works, I'm going to leave it out for now. Or send me a quick email and I'll try and give you the answer that James just gave you now as well. So someone else asked, just Alan there in the chat, is it okay if someone else delivers the feed to the house? Well, that one's simpler. If someone else is doing it, that's the same as buying it online and having it somehow delivered to your croft. You don't need to include those emissions. And in fact, if that other person is a crofter, it might actually fit into their crofting footprint, or be missed off if they were doing that just not as part of what they do for their business. And I appreciate this might be a little hard to tease out, but when we're talking about carbon footprints, and I do think this applies across for the whole farm plan carbon audits, is that we're only really looking at the business part of the croft. So if we're trying to separate that always from what might just be your everyday life or what you're doing separate from crofting. And so if someone is just doing your favor, dropping something off, probably that's not going to be in either person's footprint. But as I say, it's a matter of scale. If they're doing that regularly on a daily basis, and particularly if you pay them for that, then that becomes almost a part of the business, and it's that decision that we're trying to distinguish here.
Okay, thanks for that, Michael and James. If I just come to Ian on that sort of general point about the parameters of your carbon audit, where it stops and ends, how much of that is up to the individual crofter deciding that, and what's government looking for there?
Yeah, it's entirely up. So we're looking for the main operations of the farmer croft business. So it is entirely up to individuals how in depth it wants to go. If it's the every mile that's done for some operation to do with the business, farm croft business, or if you think about it, if you think logically, if you are passing because you're away doing non-farmer croft business activities, then there's a chance that why you would do that. You were doing that journey anyway, so it wasn't on croft or farm business you were doing it. It was because you're going to pick the kids up or you're going to do something. So that's completely. And likes of the garden, if it is your garden, if it's not used, if you don't put orphan lambs in it or whatever it is, you don't need to include it. It's your garden. But if you do use it for keeping a sick gear in or whatever, then yeah, you could include it, but it's entirely up to yourself. But certainly the garden wouldn't need to be included as part of your area.
Common grazings have come up a few times in the chat and in some of our pre-submitted questions. And we saw the example that Willie was using. The crofter there had a share in a common grazing. So we're going to come to Cheryl in a minute, talk about her experiences of doing this in a common grazing context with her sheep stock club. But just I come back to Ian again for clarity around what government are looking for here. So, and referring back to discussion at a previous meeting where we talked about the possibility for there being there being like community carbon audits being done in the crofting context where that is done at a common grazing level. So, Ian, just where are we up to on thinking there, and what's the expectations around common grazings to start off with to give us some
Yeah.
clarity?
So if the whole, if everybody in the township can be involved, and a single carbon audit can cover all activities for every crofter within that township, then that is, that's satisfaction. So do one for every crofter that's, and they can all benefit from that, a township one. So that's if all feeds, all fertilizer, everything else can be included in it, that's fine. Otherwise, if you have got shares in other townships that aren't, then obviously that's where you'd have to have your own one, because you have multiple. The one wouldn't fit everything. So it's completely acceptable to do the township level one if everyone in the township is activity can be accounted for, I suppose.
And just to clarify there, that there isn't any expectation at the moment from government that common grazings committees are have to do a carbon audit and complete the carbon plan. Yeah. If I can come to Cheryl now, and I think it would be helpful, Cheryl, if you could talk a little bit about your experience of doing a carbon audit and what you learned from it, and if it was useful, if it was not, has it just sat on the shelf? Yeah, I'll hand over to you. Thanks, Cheryl.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, just on the point there, I think it's important to make the distinction between a sheep stock club, which was what we carried out, and a common grazings. So the sheep stock club is a collective business that operates on a common grazings. So we very much done it at business level through the sheep stock club, and yeah, the consensus there from Ian seems to be that there's not much scope really to do a collective common grazings approach. It's down to the individual crofter business. So just to sort of say that at the start. Yeah, we done ours back in 2019, sort of like on the cusp of into 2020. I've posted a wee link to an article that me and my colleague Sam Brooke wrote. Faz picked it up because it had a very trendy title of Pete and Diesel, and a very popular band at the time, still are, and put the wee link up there. Yep, it's sat on the shelf. We've not looked at it. Someone made the very good point that yeah, with crofting the margins are pretty slim. With the Sheepstock Club, we're operating at scale, but still all the savings we could be making we'd already made. We were doing things anyway, like we'd moved from bag feed to buying feed hoppers, so that cut down on our plastic waste. But to be fair, that wasn't driven by the carbon audit, that was driven by Highland Council's pretty pithy recycling policy, in that they don't recycle soft plastics. So our Chrysalix lip tubs, yeah, we put them in the recycling bin, but the soft plastics were just going to landfill. So we thought, well, let's get a CAGS grant for these 3-ton hoppers, and now we get our feed blown in. It's a bit of a cost saving as well when you buy in bulk, and a bit more, yeah, a bit more economic that way there. But all of the issues that were addressed, that were raised, sorry, they were unchangeable. We can't change how much the I forget what the technical term is. We can't change how much the sheep fart. We can't change how much straw we buy in, because we could leave them outside, but they'd die. We've got sea eagles out there, so lambing has to be done on the in-buy or in the shed. There's not a lot. While it's good to know, I'm not insulting the whole scheme. I'm just saying that we're a big operation for a crofting context. We're 1,000 sheep, over 2,000 hectares of land, and even at that scale, I didn't find it that useful. That's just one thing there. I know there might be a sort of few other comments. And another point, the lady that was raising about decrofting our house, and how like the sort of biodiversity and the sort of mature planting there could be offset. Our sheep stock club and common grazings, we decided to do a diversification project. The previous committee back in 2016, and we started a micro hydro scheme. It obviously sequesters, that saves quite a lot of carbon, but that was not taken into account in the carbon audit, because technically it's another business. It doesn't exist as the same business as the sheep stock club, and I think that kind of holistic nature of crofting doesn't really fit the it was AgriCalc that we were using through SAC. It doesn't really give a sort of full view picture. There's not sort of clear lines. So that was our experience. Yeah, interesting to get the numbers and all that, but unlike a soil analysis, that you can see the sort of practical lived examples of being like, okay, we can add more lime here. We know how much. We know if we want to put on some fertilizer. Personally, carbon audit not that handy.
Thanks for those useful insights there, Cheryl. And the purpose of these meetings is to try and get our members and crofters up to speed on what government are asking us to do, what the requirements of the whole farm plan are, and to make you aware of this webinar about the carbon audit element of that. But we're also, SEF's also very interested in the policy angle on this, and questioning why crofters are being asked to do this. So we're trying to make everybody aware of what the requirements are, but don't think for a minute that we are just going along with this quietly. I sit on the whole farm plan working group, and I do give Ian quite a hard time on all of these issues. And it's something that we're constantly questioning, is effectively the issues that Cheryl raised there. What are the benefits to a crofting business in undertaking these audits? And I think what we've heard tonight is that for some businesses, yes, there absolutely are. There will be things that they can change, and the carbon audit can show them those. But in the context of Cheryl's example there, which although is operating at scale at 1,000 U's there, it's a representative of that extensive system that many crofters are operating in. And when you're operating at those levels, there are very few changes that you can make. And from a policy perspective, in terms of what government's actually looking for here, what are the actual benefits of getting crofters to participate in this and getting crofters to undertake a carbon audit? And possibly that will vary depending on what the type of business is and how those businesses are operating. But anyway, that was just a wee tangent into the policy side of this. Maybe I'll come to Ian on that just before we move on. Just any reflections on what Cheryl said and what I've just said there.
Yeah, well, we worked with you quite closely with a lot of other industry bodies as well, Donald, as you know, all the way through. We looked at the options to, if there should be any exemptions for the first year. We got to the position where we're at for 2025. We'll keep them under review. But I think the important thing is, Scottish Agriculture PLC, I'll call it, we all have to play, or everyone has to play their part in driving down emissions across the sector, from large to small. Yes, the impact, or the amount of reduction small maybe can do compared to large is not there. But I think, we're keeping everything under review, and, like Donald says, we'll continue to work, listen to the concerns, and try and come up with the medium ground, hopefully.
Because I think that is brilliant, Cheryl. I think that is the approach to be looking at, because we've got to remember that a carbon audit is a tool. It's a new way of looking at your farm. It is not going to solve it, unfortunately. You're not going to enter your data in there and then have magically more sequestration. And I think that's it's something that we're working quite hard on developing at Farm Carbon Toolkit. So we have the Farm Carbon Toolkit, which is our parent sort of structure as a company, which is built around advisory and built around actions you can be taking on farm to sequester more carbon, to improve your soil health and work on that. And so we, when you get your full results summary that you get in our toolkit, in our carbon reports, it will send you a link or give you a link that you can go then to the toolkit page and get a sort of read up on say something you might be able to do on your soil health, or how you could potentially be thinking about fuel efficiencies or whatever else on farm. But I think it's yeah, unless you, as you say there, Cheryl, unless you make actions on the audit, it does become another spreadsheet, and you probably have enough spreadsheets of livestock numbers and all the rest in your cupboards that you're never going to look at again as well. So it's a tool to be used rather than a solution to the problem of high emissions.
One of them's on the accuracy of the results. So that's what you were kind of touching on a wee bit of that there, and thinking about, like, is this, how does the accuracy and the usefulness of it improve over time? And also, just while we're on that, we did have a question there about, can we do a carbon audit before we start trading? Obviously, the usefulness of this is it after a full year's trading, or I'll just hand over to you.
So I'm going to have to, I'll come back to you on the second one there. First of all, on the accuracy. So we get our data for the UK based on the UK GHG inventory. That is, some of that data is devolved, so that you have Scottish separate to English to Welsh to Northern Irish, and some of it is UK aggregated data. And so that is data on, say, the emissions that will come from the production of fuels and fuels burning, or from material production in the UK, wood, timber, all the rest of that, and imports on that. And that gets updated annually. So we have annual improvements on those emissions factors, and so that they're relevant to the year they're produced. Because, say, 2 years ago, when there was less renewables going on because there was the wind drop, the emissions associated with electricity went through a slight peak. But now that renewables are much more extensive, we're seeing a drop in the emissions associated with electricity. So now your reports year on year will be associated with the emissions that are happening in that year's time frame, if that makes sense. And we review that regularly. We constantly update and we constantly add more where possible. We also give you a sort of score. It's not the most sophisticated system, but it's a score of our sort of trust in the data. So for example, that UK GHG inventory data is really well established. It is well verified. It's certified data. So we have really high confidence that it is an accurate emissions factor for fuels. And some other aspects of the calculator, maybe it's rock wool at a certain density of a certain shape. The LCA may be a bit more, bit less well extensively researched or extensively verified. I mean, it still has to meet our LCA standards and our standards for what we'd approve as an item on the calculator. But it is it may have a lower confidence than say the GHG inventory data. So that's how we sort of discuss the quality of the data, if that was your sort of point. And then to the carbon, the trading question you asked, and I just want to check in here, Donald, whether we're talking about trading as a croft in terms of shelling your sheep and your wool or your straw or whatever it is, or are we talking carbon trading as carbon credits?
I understood it to be trading as a business.
Yeah, in which case you could do your carbon footprint at any point in time. Okay, so Alan wants to talk about credits. Okay, we'll get onto that in a second. But your carbon footprint you can do at any point in time. It doesn't. I mean, I can't see why it would ever impact your business trading. Ian, tell me if I'm wrong, but as long as you've got your carbon footprint and one other item done, you'll be getting your rural payment scheme in the next 5 years. And as was mentioned by Willie before, it's they last for 5 years as well. So getting it done and getting the payment scheme seems like a pretty fast system too. In terms of carbon credits are a bit of a wild west at the moment. there's not a great deal of verification going on there. So I would really strongly recommend, before going into any carbon credits setting schemes, that you really do some due diligence on it. Some people are offering things that they can't quite keep up. And then there is also a problem with carbon credits, that if you are a croft and you're thinking, I want to be acting on net zero in the next few years, any carbon credits you're selling for, say, the woodland that's locking in biomass on farm, or carbon credits for soil improvements that you're making, you no longer own. So that carbon credit, the carbon you're sequestering there, it goes on to the person that has bought those carbon credits. And so they would not be part of your footprint. So say you had a big bit of woodland on your croft and you sold carbon credits for that woodland sequestration no longer is part of your footprint, and so is no longer part of your journey towards net zero. So just be aware that carbon credits, while they can look like a bit of a silver bullet in terms of payments and things, can have some sort of dubious aspects to them.
Yeah, and I think if I can just jump in quickly, James, that there's a link there between what people were talking about earlier on the common grazing. It's come up in the chat and in the questions we had from beforehand. So we've, as a company, I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but it's something actually we're kind of tackling in several places across the UK. Some of the common land in and around Cumbria, the lakes, we have built a special calculator just for them, where they map the common and they create a commons footprint, and then they dish it out to the various people whose cattle are grazing that land, basically. But why would they do that? And this is my little pitch for taking the extra step to maybe look at that common land or the township, is because quite often those areas are peatland or moorland, or wetlands or other areas that are basically quite hard to farm. However, more often than not, they have quite a high level of sequestration happening there, and especially as it's being grazed well. And that's the difference that these different farmers can make. So in those big schemes, yes, I think they're being run by projects. Probably people are coming in and advising on the whole thing, and probably they're doing some soil sampling as well within that common area. But in the new forest as well, they're looking at this. So I think I've already raised it within the team here that we at least think about how this might work at a croft level. And so if anyone wants to sort of chat to us about that, I think that's probably the next step. If you have any interest in it at all, is just maybe give us a phone. But we could start to look at that. And that's basically because, you know, if you're that little example we showed you, there was a small emission on that little example croft of 12 tons of carbon per year. But if that croft was interacting and sending animals out into common land that happened to be sequestering, maybe there's woodland on that land and all sorts of good things are happening there in terms of carbon, then a portion of that gets given back to that croft, and it might actually make the croft net zero. And then, I mean, as you say, Cheryl, the job is done, that you can't really do more than doing that. But actually, the job might then be, well, what can we do in the common land? What can we change over there? And we will benefit from that in proportion to what we're doing there. So there's a kind of link, but that we kind of didn't put that in the presentation. We thought it was too much, too complex. It's definitely something to think about once you've got your own footprint and you kind of think, what next? What else can we do? But I think that goes beyond the scope of as Ian says, the whole farm plan. But it's something we're kind of interested in, and we'd like to take forward if anyone wants to chat to us about it.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that offer there, Michael. Sounds like some interesting developments. So we've had a couple of questions come in there about further processing of croft produce. So one on sheep fleece and another one on selling through a box scheme. So your emissions associated with traveling to the abattoir, etc. Where would those fit in to the carbon calculator tools? Who wants to take that one? James?
Yeah, I'm happy to go. Yeah. So this is again a case of thinking about where the boundaries of your croft, of where the boundaries of the footprint that you're making, and this is where you want to think about your carbon footprint as your croft unit, your years, or what are the emissions from the Crofton year. If you are trying to track your emissions to the farm gate, you don't need to worry about the distribution beyond that, the abattoir beyond that, and the emissions beyond that. If you want to talk about the emissions of your produce, so your wool and all the rest of it, you may want to take it all the way to the abattoir. So you may want to talk about the emissions associated. Each kilo of wool has that distribution associated with it as well, getting it to not the abattoir for wool, obviously, but in that sort of system. So this is it's a really important step. We actually have on our when you make your report for the first time, it will give you a drop down and it will ask you the question of where's the boundaries of your report. Is it the farm gate? Is it the farm gate plus processing? Is it distribution to point of sale? And that is a really good categorization of your report, and it's a really good thing to be thinking about. And with your data that you get out the other end of it, you can also separate it out by the bits that may be distribution beyond the point of beyond the farm gate, and you can separate out your fuel usage by labeling it as fuel usage for, I don't know, shearing or whatever it is, or for your wool cleaning or whatever it might be. And that way you can sort of just consider your footprint on the different levels of farm gate, beyond farm gate, etc.
Yeah, so for the whole farm plan point of view, it would be for the farm gate. However, probably thinking of if you're thinking of marketing your business, how important it is to maybe consumers to see that how you've produced your produce, is maybe having that messaging of, where your total emissions are from production, to sell you that story of how ethically produced, Crofton products are. And it's that extra message that, that you can sell Croft produce with that maybe larger farms don't have.
But another question there in the chat relating to carbon credits again. And yeah, so the landlord is planning to block drains to improve the peat. I can only assume they will be considering carbon trading. So if they trade those carbon credits, then the crofter should not count them. Is that correct? So I think just a wider point here. I think James mentioned the Wild West earlier on in terms of carbon trading. In terms of registration of peatland schemes, peatland code schemes on common grazings, that's still at very early stages as well. So if anybody's out there has got a landlord who's talking about this and talking about doing peatland restoration on their common grazings, then it's really important that you take your own legal advice. That it I think most people's understanding is that crofters should be able to share in those in the development of those schemes. It certainly will require um, either a Section 19A scheme for development or a Section 50B application to the Crofting Commission to enable that to go forward. So the idea that a landlord can go ahead and start blocking drains and trading those carbon credits for themselves, it's just not the case. So if anybody thinks that that's happening somewhere, then you should be seeking professional advice and certainly contacting SCF to talk to us about it. And then the same would apply for inputting this into the carbon tools as has been discussed so far. I would think.
Good evening.
Anybody want to add anything on that point from the panel?
Yeah, no, I just totally echo what you said about that. If the landlord's doing it without the consultant, the shareholders, then that's raise it for yourselves and through the commission. And and can I just pick up on the tree? There's one just further up about trees, and I'm not sure the specifics of it. So if the trees are planted by the Grazings Committee, and it's the Grazings Committee that claims BPS, then I'm assuming they would include them in the on the Grazings Committees potentially. Or carbon audit, but yeah, I'm not quite sure on the specifics of that. If it's certainly a separate business to any business that's claiming BPS, then it wouldn't be included in the whole farm plan.
And that's the important point there, isn't it, Ian? That the whole farm plan is relating to BPS.
Yeah, BPS.
At this current point in time. So unless the which would be an unusual situation if Grazings was claiming BPS, but that would be the circumstances where that would apply.
Right. My name is John Riley. I'm calling from North Uist. What I can see, providing somebody has access to all your inputs, then they could work out pretty much what your carbon usage would be. So that's easy enough to determine. But what I want to know is, how can I increase my carbon in the soil? Currently, I use a lot of seaweed, but the soil that we have is maca, and it's quite sandy, and it doesn't last more than perhaps 18 months, and then you've lost it all. So there's not much scope there other than applying an awful lot of it, and I do use a great deal. The other question I have is that there's a lot of ground here not utilized fully for grazing. Now, if an animal is grazing grass, it produces methane through normal processes. A percentage of what it eats is being used to create bone and flesh. Now, if the ground is not grazed at all and the grass dies, it also produces methane. That's lost to the environment. Therefore, surely it must be better to graze than not to graze. Those are my questions.
Yeah, so in terms of soil health, and yeah, I've got a family friend that farms up on the Maca in South Uist, and he has the same problem of his soil getting destroyed. We can there's various different guidance out there in terms of soil improvement systems, and like I say, we have our toolkit available that you can go through and have a look. What it does sound like probably though is that you'd benefit from a chat with an advisor that can sort of run through your situation specifically, and we have availability on that on our site as well, and I'm sure Willie and the AgriCalc team will also be able to put you into contact with someone on that end. But really, in soil health systems, we do work under, or we do sort of champion the regenerative approach of making sure that you don't do too much soil disturbance, that you leave your soil covered, that you work in work with the relatively minimal inputs, but very tailored, precise inputs, not over stressing your soil with various nutrients and things, and trying to work on things like improving your worm and biodiversity in soil as well. Again, all of this advice on the website. I am not a soil expert. I work in coding and doing the maths behind carbon footprinting, but we have plenty of experts that can come and have this chat with you and go through it. In terms of your emissions associated, the methane emissions you're discussing, 100%. The grass that a sheep is eating is what is then being decomposed and turned into enteric methane by the sheep as they're chewing on it. So that's that portion of the food goes into the growth, the maintenance, the production of the animal, but then also there is excess that gets converted into methane, which it burps and farts and all the rest. And those are the basic emissions as we understand them with the animals themselves. In terms of your comment on the fact that grass in the field will decompose and have emissions associated with it, the net rate of sequestration and the net rate of emissions are considered to be zero. So this is the current guidance, the IPCC guidance and the UK Gov guidance is that in an unmanaged grassland, the rate at which it decomposes and releases emissions is equal to the rate at which it sequesters carbon and takes in carbon. So it's the extra actions that we take on that, which then can help build that soil carbon and help improve that carbon takedown into the soil so that they maybe are sequestering more than they are emitting. And it's also things like returning managed land and overworked land into a more sustainable system where it has the chance to recover and recuperate. So things like mob grazing and the rest of that come in there and help sort of manage the grasses in that way and help sustain the soil in that system. But it's a fascinating conversation in terms of how you account for some of these shorter scale emissions as well, in terms of the methane being produced by the plants, because it is a very small proportion, but over time and over vast areas that does add up. So yeah, no, it's a great question. Thank you for that.
Right. Well, thanks. I've been asking a lot of people that for years, and nobody's ever given me an answer on it.
Well, hopefully we've got some advice on the site as well. If you want some further reading, there's some more data on grasslands and stuff on there as well.
Mm-hmm. Right. Thank you.
It was worth coming along just for that. Any final questions from the room?
I was going to ask a question. It might be a daft question, but
Yeah, go ahead, Neil.
Once all the farm plans have been done, etc., the carbon audits and the soil sampling and the health plans, what's the process for submitting it? Is there a section on the rural payment screen that you scan it into, or can it be submitted any time, or is there a time scale when it kicks off for?
Was going to be my wrap-up question as well. Was we've heard about how to do all the plans. We've heard what's involved in that and the various toolkits that are available. But if you could just summarize exactly what it is that government are looking for here, and what the process is for crofters to demonstrate that on their SAF form ahead of May 25.
So on your SAF 2025, all you'll be required to do is to tell us which of the 5 audits and plans you've done. So it's, so it'll be a tick box and they enter a date on when it was prepared. And at the moment, the only information you have to provide, and it's not with the SAF, it's completely with the SAF, is if you carry out the biodiversity audit. So if you've completed your habitat map, that's the only information for the whole farm plan that you need to submit to ARPID. And you can do that either. There's an email address you can do it through. You can do it online using our mapping tool, or you can send your habitat map to your local office and they'll forward it to our Edinburgh team. So yeah, so the only one piece of information you will need to provide at the moment is your habitat map. The rest you just have to indicate on your SAF which ones you've done. And the other important thing, if I can try and get across, is we don't want these to be tick box exercises. If they're just tick box exercises, like what Cheryl said, they prepared one and they just didn't do anything with it, it's pointless. And that's what we don't want these things to be. We want these to be actually information that you will find helpful and you'll take from it something to be able to improve your croft business. So it's not that, it's just another piece of red tape with the government. It is that taking information from them to make yourself to make changes to your business. So thank you.
I think we'll wrap up there. Thank you very much to our panelists, and thank you to you all for being here and for all your really good questions. I think it's been a really, really interesting and informative session. Our next session is, Celia?
Our next session is 4 weeks today, and it's back to a general whole farm plan webinar. So yeah, just any questions. We'll be inviting questions prior to that. Sign up.
Yeah, hopefully that'll be a good kind of wrap up one to go back over some of the things we've covered in the other sessions and clarify anything that's arisen from people actually trying to undertake some of these as well. And please give us any feedback you have from the meeting tonight as well. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Cheers.